So this is a movement analysis of a baseball swing. We're going to do most of it from a side view of the batter, but for right now we'll just start with this frontal view. And the first phase of the baseball swing is the stance, and that's currently what the batter's doing. And the important thing to remember here is these are all isometric contractions in this first phase, just because the muscles aren't moving actively, or not actively, but they're just not moving right now. So that's what isometric means. So the first thing that we're going to go through is kind of just how his hips are flexed. Okay, so the iliopsoas muscle is the hip flexor that does a larger portion of the work here. So we're looking at the hip. The rectus femoris muscle is more effective while the knee is in extension. So if that knee were just locked out straight, then that would be the muscle that was doing more of the work here. But for the most part, nobody really does that in baseball because you have to unlock the muscle for the leg to be able to move. And then the sartorius is like the rectus femoris because it's just a two-joint muscle, and it works better in flexion when the knee is in extension. So it's like it in that way. The pectineus, the tensor fascia latae, and the adductor longus also assist in flexion. And then if we come down here to the knee and look at that, his knees are in flexion because they are bent. If he had them fully extended, it would require the help of the popliteus muscle to flex the knee before it can move. And we know from class that the knee has to be flexed in order to move and to rotate laterally and medially, or else that causes some pretty serious injuries. So for the knee flexors, the primary muscles that do this are the hamstring muscles. So those are the gracilis, the sartorius, the popliteus, and the gastrocnemius. And the angle of knee flexion. Right there, you can see that. So the next body part that we'll be talking about in this first phase is the ankle, which is in slight dorsiflexion. I really feel like the ground does most of the work here and just bends that ankle. But there it is, you can see that. And then, but also the muscles that are involved in dorsiflexion, because they are at work at least a little bit here, those muscles are the tibialis anterior, the extensor digitorum longus, the peroneus tertius, and the extensor hallucis longus. The ground and knee provide most of the work here. That means that the normal flexors play more of a passive role than an active role. And then we'll go up the body here. And for this, we can actually move into, watch the swing there, and just see how that goes. And then we can move into a different view, which would be easier to see some of the shoulder points. So the left arm of the batter is horizontally adducted. And you can see that right here. It comes from this shoulder and comes this way. And Then it is also medially rotated. So that means if he's standing in an anatomical position, his shoulder is going to be turning in towards his right shoulder, as well as being horizontally abducted or adducted. The arm on the right is abducted, and it's lifted slightly above the glenohumeral joint, so you can see that right here. Right about in here somewhere is where his joint is, and that's raised just slightly above it. So we can actually look at the angle of this joint here, and then so we see that. See if we can draw that again. Right there. Right there. So there we go. Alright, so the most important muscles that cause the medial rotation of the shoulder in his left arm would be the subscapularis and the teres major. Other muscles like the pectoralis major and the anterior deltoid also do some work here. And then in the left arm is also horizontally adducted, as I mentioned before, by the pectoralis major, the anterior deltoid, and the coracobrachialis. The right arm is abducted by the middle deltoid and the supraspinatus. It is flexed by the anterior deltoid and a portion of the pectoralis major. So the next thing we can talk about here are the elbows. And first thing we can point out is the angle of this front elbow. So we see that from this angle it's at 90 degrees, 98 degrees, and optimal would be 90, so it's pretty close there if we're just doing it while the pitch is coming at him. So the most crucial elbow flexor is the brachialis. The other flexors are biceps brachii and the brachioradialis. So that was the elbows. But let's also show the degree of flexion in this back elbow. Pretty hard to draw. See if that was pretty good. So that is 67. It's hard to see in that picture, but I believe that's 67. And now we move on to the hands. All joints of the hand are in flexion. And so that means that we can kind of go to the next page, which is actually going to allow the batter to move. So phase 2 is the load. In phase 1, we see Newton's first law of inertia working because he's standing still, and we know that from the law that the first law of inertia is going to keep an object at rest if it's at rest, or it's going to keep it moving, or it's going to want to keep the object moving if it's still moving. So we see that the object is at rest here. The batter has to break inertia in order to start his swing. So he's going to have to get some sort of movement going, or else that's probably going to slow his swing down if he just swings directly at the ball here. So in order to do that, he's going to shift his weight through this leg and then put it back down. And that's going to get him out of he's going to lessen the impact of inertia here, because now he's got some sort of movement. Even though he's stopped here, he never stops moving, because the hands go immediately after that, and then he just moves through the ball there. So the inertia is gone for what he can do. So now he's back in his stance. So he uses the hip flexors to get that front foot off the ground, and we can see that right. We can see that right here. Oh, that didn't work. So we can see that right in this area here. Just because his hip's flexing and he's picking it up, and then it reaches the maximal flexion that he wants right there. So the major hip flexors are the iliopsoas muscles, the pectineus, rectus femoris, and the sartorius tensor fasciae latae. Sartorius and the tensor fasciae latae aid the major hip flexor, which, as I said, was the iliopsoas muscle, in flexion. The degrees of hip flexion are, we'll have to go back this way and show that if we can. So we can zoom in on him here and see that. So this is going to be like if he was laying down on his back. So then if we look at the angle here, it's going to be, if we try to go down from his spine into that hip, we can see that he's gone to 83 degrees. And this is a concentric contraction, because the hips are flexing using the hip flexors. The iliopsoas muscles are agonists, and the gluteus maximus is the antagonist in this movement. The knee also increases flexion with the hamstring muscles, so those muscles are acting as agonists. And then that angle, as you can see right here, so this is also a concentric contraction. Simultaneously, the shoulder is increasing the degree of horizontal abduction. So if we come back to this side view here, we'll be able to see his shoulder is actually, if we come back this to this right here, we can see that if I draw a line down through his shoulder and his hip, that he's going to be moving backwards. So let's watch that. See there, he's moving backwards. His shoulder's no longer on that line, except for just a little bit. So we see that it's horizontally abducting the shoulder because it's flexing, or it's abducting in. And this also results in a greater degree of medial rotation of the shoulder. The prime movers of horizontal adduction of the shoulder are the pectoralis major, the anterior deltoid, and the coracobrachialis muscles. The medial rotation of the shoulder allows for the pectoralis major to be placed in a stronger position when performing horizontal abduction, which is going to be in the next phase. So right now he's kind of pulling these muscles back in the shoulder here, he's pulling those back, and eventually those muscles are going to kind of pull back, and then they're going to shoot forward down here. So as we've learned in class, a longer muscle will produce a more forceful contraction. Horizontal adduction is an eccentric contraction. In this movement, the batter uses the muscles on the anterior side of the glenohumeral joint to concentrically contract the arm into horizontal adduction. So he uses the muscles on the anterior, which is the front. So they're going to be, those muscles are going to be right in there on the shoulder, even though his shoulder's kind of is adducted, so you can't see those muscles clearly right now, but they're there. And then once this movement is complete, the muscles on the posterior side of the joint are lengthened through the corresponding eccentric contraction of the deltoid infraspinatus and the teres minor. So the muscles on the back are kind of stretching out as he's pulling that, that arm back into his swing. So a lengthened muscle can provide more force than if the batter's front arm is still in the same location as it was in the stance. And then the bend also is going to give him more force with the elbow. The triceps brachii are also lengthened to provide a more forceful contraction in the next phase. So the triceps brachii is going to be on the back of the humerus there. And then in the stance phase, the right shoulder of the batter was adducting slightly above 90 degrees. So that's going to be his back shoulder. Now during the loading portion of the swing, the batter moves it to adduct the arm, uses it to move the arm into adduction into a position of 90 degrees. So he's going to come down a little bit closer. And we'll see that right here as his arm starts right there. And then he's just going to kind of bring that down, especially the hands. And now it's definitely even with the shoulders, basically even with his hands. So now his muscles have been stretched out, and they should be ready to go to provide a forceful contraction for him to hit the baseball. So in the stance, or actually the agonists for adduction, are the latissimus dorsi, the teres major, and the sternocostal pectoralis. So these muscles are performing a concentric contraction of the muscles. The batter has now transferred his weight onto his back foot. And we'll see that right here. He picks that foot up, and all his weight's on that back foot now. And it kind of falls forward. Abduction is occurring in the front leg while he lifts it. So we see that he's drawing that leg in. So that's actually adduction. And then the gluteus minimus assists in that. So he's drawing that leg in right there. And then he will put that back down. And those are isometric and eccentric contractions that allow his left pelvis to stay where he wants it, so it's not kind of dragging him down. or throw him off balance. He's able to maintain balance here. And then the foot is also in dorsiflexion while in the air. Agonists for dorsiflexion are the tibialis anterior, the extensor digitorum longus, and the peroneus tertius. Once the front leg reaches its climax, the batter places it back down. Once the foot is on the ground, the body weight and tension in the leg muscles cause a compressive load on the hip. So we see that he puts his leg down, and now we have a compressive load that is driven up through the hip, and that's going to put a compressive load on the hip. This is done through abduction of the back leg. So abduction is going to we see that the front leg and the back leg are getting further apart right in that area. So we know that he's going to be using those muscles in that area. And the abduction of the back leg is going to be, they're going to contract at the same time as the abductors in the front leg. So the degree of flexion in the knee increased when the batter raised it. The agonist for the flexion in the knee is the hamstring muscles, and those are concentric contractions. And so we see that the compressive load on the hip also, he's going to gain some force from the ground, and that's going to make his swing more powerful, because every force, there's an equal but opposite reaction. So now the knee is extended slightly to be placed on the ground. So we see that it's extended. Well, it's actually extended pretty well here, because it's in he's got it extended pretty good right there, and then he just puts it back down, and or he's got it right here. He's got it flexed, and then he's just going to put it back down using extension of that knee joint. So when the knee was extended, the agonist there was the quad muscles. And we also see right here that there's some energy being stored in this back leg, back here. And now, as he comes forward, that energy is kind of, for the lower half of the body, it's going to kind of come up here and go down like that, and he's going to get more power from that. The left wrist of the batter is increasing in the degree of radial deviation. So he's kind of, this will be kind of hard to show right here. But his hands are deviating more towards the thumb on both of those. So you can see the angle of that there. And the agonists there are the flexor carpi radialis and the extensor carpi radialis longus and brevis. And these are concentric contractions. From just looking at the moment when the foot of the batter hits the ground, and we're entering phase 3 here, which is going to be the contact phase. Now, this is the moment that I was just referring to. The foot has hit the ground, and You might think that phase 2 is basically just a waste of time, but like I mentioned before, this helps him to get out of inertia's grasp, and he can have a more powerful and forceful swing by having some movement before and transferring that power that he's going to generate right here into the baseball. And phase 2 also serves to produce some energy and rhythm that the batter's going to need when he hits the ball. Once the foot is down, it begins to turn towards the pitcher. So we see right there. If we look right there, he's going to put that down and it's going to turn right there. Okay. So this is known as an eversion. Agonists are the tibialis posterior and the tibialis anterior. This slight turn allows for more external rotation of the knee, which goes back to what we were saying before. The knee's not locked, so he's decreased his injury percentage here, and now he can turn a little bit farther and just allow for more movement in the hips and the rest of the body. The agonist for the external rotation of the knee are the biceps femoris, and that's a concentric contraction. The first thing to move after the foot is the hips, so it's kind of going to go up to here and then around, and you'll see what I'm talking about in a minute. So the first thing to move after that is the hips, and we see that right there. The hips are very first thing to move after that foot. There we go. They've started moving. The hips begin rotating separate from the upper body, and that generates torque. So a lot of people use that big leg kick like this batter has, and that generates some power there, and then they also move their hips first, and that's going to generate torque. The left hip is adducted by the adductor magnus, the adductor longus, the adductor brevis, and the gracilis. So it's coming into the body, and those muscles are going to pull him forward. So that's one thing that's going to generate a little bit more power for him. The front hip is laterally rotated. Agonists are the piriformis, the gemellus superior, and the gemellus inferior, the obturator infernus, the obturator externus, and the quadratus femoris. So those muscles are going to be concentrically contracting. The spine rotates to the side where the internal obliques develop tension. So right here on this side, his front side, they're going to be the obliques here. They're going to be developing tension, and like I said, that will cause the spine to move towards that side. So that's one thing that is going to begin to rotate right here, and that's an eccentric contraction as well. This causes the shoulders to turn. So this is kind of a chain reaction, remember? It's going from the foot and kind of down this way. In baseball, you don't want your shoulders to turn until they have to, because that's just kind of an obvious reason. With the shoulders goes the head, and with the head goes the eyes. So if you take your eyes off the ball, you're not going to hit it. So anybody that's played any level of ball at any level is going to be able to tell you that. Don't take your eyes off the ball because they've heard it 1,000 times. Premature rotation of the shoulder. So if his shoulder is turning out this way too early, then that's going to take his eyes out here, and that's going to lock out this elbow right here, which will take away from the power that he's going to use from that elbow. If he rotates that shoulder too early, it's likely going to result in a ground out to third or a shallow pop out to the right side. All of these individual movements are working to produce the maximum amount of torque, all of which is currently stored in the really the elbow right now, but he's transferring them to his hands. So now the left shoulders begin to horizontally abduct. So that's his front shoulder, so it's going to start moving this way now. And the agonist are the middle and posterior deltoid, the infraspinatus, and the teres minor. And then his right shoulder is horizontally adducting, and that's the agonist for that. This is an eccentric contraction, horizontal adduction, and then the left shoulder is concentrically contracting. That causes extension of the triceps brachii. So these muscles on the back are going that way, or not really that way. They're kind of coming around. So they're stretching a little bit, and then that's going to cause the biceps or the triceps brachii to be stretching out a little bit. So as the left arm follows the rest of the body, in these motions that I've been going through, they move towards the location of a pitch ball. So now the hands are going to start to come from here and kind of through this hidden zone. As the arms, actually both arms are extending with the front hand leading. So now we kind of see that these arms are coming forward and going down like I showed you. So here we see kind of the full course of what I've gone through here. It comes out through the shoulders and down through the hands. All that force is transferred pretty much through that path. It's pretty jagged. So one thing that you'll notice is that this elbow right here is going to be extending. You can see that pretty well there. So that transfers all the force of the bodily torque that's been produced by the turning of the body parts previous to now are supplied by the body into the bat. So it's all about transferring the force of the body into the bat and into the ball. So we also, this is kind of hard to see because his hands are moving so fast, but you can see right there that the angle changes. The angle of his hands have changed, and right here they're different. So I kind of watch that as I go through here. And I'll take that stuff off so we can see it more clearly. So he's going to snap his wrist, and that's going to be done through ulnar deviation. So his wrists are going to snap that bat through the zone. And let me kind of try to draw this. So his bat, if I'm looking at the ball, if I'm him, my bat's going to come in this way. And then that ball's going to come through right there. And now, I'm not going to draw this, but you're going to snap that bat through the hitting zone, through that ball with your hands, which would be right here. So they're going to come this way as well. So there we go. We have that, if that helps. The agonists for the ulnar deviation are the flexor carpi ulnaris and the extensor carpi ulnaris. The left hand is in a pronated position and the right hand is in supine position. So this is going to be referred to a lot of times if you watch anybody who does instructional videos. This is going to be referred to as palm up, palm down. And that's just kind of a technique that a lot of people use in the major leagues. So all of the force is now transferred into the ball right here. And that's done through the snap of the wrist. And then the bat hits the bottom half of the ball, which results in backspin. And if I can go slow enough here, you can see that backspin really well. Or you can see the backspin produce a different flight. That ball comes up and he just hit it basically square on the bat. But he really hit the bottom more so than the top. And if he had hit the top, then it would have created a downspin. And that's not what you want, because everybody these days are talking about the launch angle. And that's kind of what this is he's launching that ball off that bat like that. But I'd say Mike Trout probably does it the best of anybody and doesn't exaggerate too much in the launch angle area of things. This causes an upward Magnus force hitting the bottom of the ball, and Magnus effect. The ball rises as it flies through the air because of the low pressure on the top half of the ball compared to the bottom half, and that's going to create, it's going to be basically like a straight line out of the park, or looks like that if you hit it right. And then as the upper body is progressing through the contact portion of the swing, the lower body continues working. So, like I talked about before, the force has kind of come up through the hip and gone back down through that foot, and then the force at the upper body has kind of come from the core back around to the hands. The back leg is adducted by the adductor longus, the adductor brevis, and the adductor magnus, as well as the gracilis. So it's basically just pulling, and it is pulled so hard that I'm not sure if we would be able to see this because of the video, but that back foot is off the ground, probably say about an inch at least. So he's generated a lot of force with that back leg, and he's just throwing that into the front leg, which is going to throw more force into the ball. So the back leg is going to move with the hips. Once the hips began rotating, now the back leg moves with them. And the agonists for the flexion and the back knee are the gracilis, the sartorius, and the popliteus, and the gastrocnemius. And the flexion, the degree of flexion increases. And we can see that right here. definitely increased. And the flexion is a concentric contraction of the agonist there. So the knee of the front leg now, we can see that it's made a complete 180, and now is completely straight, no flexion at all. So the agonist for knee extension is the rectus femoris, vastus medialis, and the vastus lateralis. And this is a concentric contraction. The front hip pulls the body through with adduction, and the front foot uses the ground to adduct more forcefully. So both legs are adducting here because they're both pulling towards the center. But the back leg is trying to drive force basically through that front leg and generate strength with those adductor muscles of the hip. And then the fourth phase is going to be just the finish, which is happening right here. So from contact, he extends both of those elbows out. So now they're fully extended. And the front arm radius rotates laterally over the ulna to put the forearm in a supine position. So from that palm up, palm down position, now both forearms have been kind of inverted there. And the right arm of the ulna rotates laterally under the radius to pronate the forearm. The left humerus rotates laterally, and the agonists for lateral rotation are the infraspinatus, the teres minor, and the concentric contraction. Right humerus rotates medially, so that's the front humerus, or the back humerus there. And the agonists for that are the subscapularis and the teres major, and that's a concentric contraction. And then finally, there's an